There's a thing nobody tells you about a dying town. It goes quiet long before it goes empty. Cottonwood Bend had a name that was a lie by the time I rode into it. Not one cottonwood left standing. They'd been cut for fence rails and coffins and stove wood 30 years back, and the only thing the name did anymore was make strangers laugh when they passed the leaning signpost. So when I tell you that one man, one stubborn, sun-leathered old man who barely spoke 3 words a season, spent the last years of his life carrying water across a 1/4 mile of cracked earth to keep 40 saplings alive, you'll understand why the whole town thought he'd lost his mind. I thought so too. For a long while I thought so too. I'm going to tell you about Elias Crane and the ring of young trees he planted around his house out past the dry wash. I'm going to tell you what we said about him, the cruel and easy things, and what we did when his water ran out. And I'm going to tell you what we found the day the wind finally laid one of those saplings flat and the dirt gave up what it had been keeping. But I want you to hold one thing in your head before I start. The way I wish somebody had told it to me back when I was young enough to mock a grieving man and call it good sense. You can't always tell the difference between a fool and a man keeping a promise, not from a distance, not until the cost of it shows. So ride a while with me. Let me show you the man before I show you the grave, because if I tell you the reason first you'll feel sorry, and sorry is cheap. I'd rather you earn it the slow way, same as the town did and same as I have to, every time I close my eyes and see him out there in that white heat, 1 bucket in each fist, walking the ring. Stay with me, this one stayed with me. The first time I really saw Elias Crane, it was 104 degrees in the shade, and there wasn't any shade. I'd been sent out by Mr. Dolan to count the strays that drifted toward the dry wash, where the grass still held a little green in the low spots. I kept a tally book for that, a little leather thing, edges curled soft as an old dog's ear, and I chewed the pencil down to a nub by noon every day. Habit. My mother used to swat my hand for it. She'd be glad to know death didn't break a man of his small, stupid habits. I still catch myself doing it, all these years on, chewing on nothing. I came up over the rise, and there he was. A man walking, bucket in each hand, arms gone straight and tight as fence wire from the weight. He wasn't young. You could see it in the way he set each foot down careful, like the ground might cheat him. The heat came off the flat in waves you could see, that liquid shimmer, and through it he looked less like a person than a thing the land was dreaming. He walked to a sapling no taller than my knee, knelt, poured but slow, so slow, tipping the bucket a finger's width at a time so the water sank instead of running off. Then he scraped the wet dirt up around the little trunk with his bare hands, banked it like you'd bank a fire to keep it overnight. Then he stood and walked to the next one, and the next. I counted 40 of them once I rode closer. 40 saplings, set in a wide ring maybe 100 feet across, with his low sodden plank house squatting dead in the center of it. Cottonwoods, willows, a couple of scraggly oaks that had no business trying to live out here. Half of them looked half dead already. He was losing. Anybody could see he was losing. The sun was going to take them, and there wasn't a thing 2 old arms could do about it. He never looked up at me. Not once. I sat my horse not 30 feet off, and he poured his water and banked his dirt like I was weather. "That's a long way to carry water," I said finally. I don't know why, to prove I was there maybe. He went still, just for a breath. Then he poured the rest of the bucket and said without turning, "It is." That was all, "It is." And he picked up his empty pails and started the long walk back toward the wash, where I now saw he'd dug a kind of seep hole down to the last damp of the creek bed. He'd walk to it, wait for the buckets to fill by inches, walk back. 40 trees, 2 buckets a trip. You do the arithmetic. I did, sitting there. It came out to a man spending every hour of daylight he had left on this earth keeping alive a thing that, by any sense God gave a fence post, was already dead. I rode back to town, and I told them about it, because that's what you do in a place where nothing happens. You carry the small strange things back like a cat bringing a bird to the porch. They already knew, of course. Everybody knew about Old Crane and his trees. I was just the newest to gawk. "He's been at it 3 years," said Halloran, who ran the mercantile and knew everything because everybody owed him money. "Started the spring after he came back. Plants 'em in the fall when the rains might help, hauls water all summer when they won't. Loses some, plants more. Man's cracked. Sun got him, or the war did one." "The war." "He scouted for the army. Then before that," Halloran waved a hand the way you wave off a fly or a fact you can't be bothered to get right. "Wagon master, brought folks west. That's all old history. The point is he don't farm, don't ranch, don't dig for nothing you can sell. He digs to plant trees. He said it the way you'd say he digs to bury gold he won't spend. With that particular contempt small men keep for a thing they can't understand and can't profit from." There was a woman there, Mrs. Ansell, the schoolteacher's widow, and she didn't laugh with the rest of them. She just looked into her coffee. I noticed it then and forgot it and only thought of it later, the way you do when the forgetting starts to cost you. "Leave the man be," she said quietly. "He's not hurting anybody." "He's wasting water," somebody said, and that landed, because it was the third dry year and water was the only argument anybody really believed in anymore. A man who poured good water on dead sticks while the town's own gardens curled brown, that was close enough to a sin that nobody had to say the word. I'll be honest with you because I promised at the start I would. I laughed along. I was 22 and I wanted these men to like me, and laughing at the crazy old man who carried water to dead trees was the cheapest coin I had to buy my way in. I made a joke. I don't even remember what it was. I remember the others laughing, and I remember it felt good, and I remember Mrs. Ansell not laughing, and I remember being annoyed at her for it. That's the kind of young man I was. I tell you so you'll trust me later when I tell you what I became. I started finding reasons to ride out past the wash. Tell yourself it was the strays. The strays really did drift that way. But the truth is the old man had got under my skin like a splinter you can't see and can't stop pressing. There was something in the care of it. I'd seen men work hard before, God knows. Hard work was the only thing the Bend produced in any quantity. But hard work out here was always against something. You broke the ground, you fought the cattle, you beat back the brush. Everything was a battle, and every man was a soldier in it, swinging. Crane wasn't fighting anything. That was the thing I couldn't make sit right. When he knelt by those saplings and banked the dirt with his fingers slow, it wasn't a battle. It was the gentlest thing I'd ever seen a man do, and he did it 40 times a day in heat that killed dogs, and he did it for trees, and it made no sense, and I couldn't stop watching. One evening cooler, the sun going down red and swollen behind the dust, I rode out and didn't say anything, just got off my horse a ways off and sat on a rock and watched. He clocked me. I knew he clocked me, but he didn't run me off and he didn't speak, and after a while that silence stopped being awkward and started being something else. Company, almost. When the light got too low to work, he straightened up, both hands pressed to the small of his back, and made a sound, not a word, just an old man's grunt at his own body. He looked over at me. "You're Dollins," he said. "Toby Hale," I said. "I work his cattle. You've been sitting on my rock 4 evenings. I hadn't known he counted. I felt my face go hot. "I can sit somewhere else." Didn't say move. He wiped his hands on his trousers. They were stained dark with dirt clear to the wrist, permanent like part of his skin. "You want to know why?" It wasn't a question. I nodded anyway. He looked at the ring of saplings, dark little shapes against the dying light, and for a long moment I thought he wasn't going to say anything at all, that he'd just decided to let me carry my ignorance home like everybody else. Then he said something I didn't understand for a long time, and that I've turned over so many nights, since that the words have worn smooth as creek stones. "A man plants a tree," he said. "He won't sit in the shade of. That's the only kind worth planting." Then he picked up his buckets, even empty, even in the dark, and walked back toward his house in the middle of the ring, and I understood that the conversation, the most I'd ever get from him, was over. I rode home in the dark and I didn't make any jokes at the saloon that night. I couldn't have told you why. The drought got worse. Of course it did. Droughts don't care what an old man's doing out past the wash. By high summer the creek seep had gone from a trickle to a stain to nothing. I knew because I rode out and found him standing over the dry seep hole, just standing, the way a man stands over a thing that's died on him. The 2 buckets sat empty in the cracked mud. Behind him, a quarter-mile off, his 40 trees waited for water that wasn't coming. He didn't see me at first, and in that minute the old man with his back to me, his shoulders down, his whole stubborn machine of a life run up against a dry hole in the ground, I felt something turn over in my chest that I had no name for at 22. I have a name for it now. It was shame. Not for him. For me, and for the town, and for every cheap laugh we'd spent on a man we had decided to find ridiculous, because finding him ridiculous was easier than finding out the truth. I rode back to town. I didn't go to the saloon. I went to Mrs. Ansell's because she was the one who hadn't laughed, and I figured the one who didn't laugh might be the one who knew. She let me in. She gave me coffee I didn't want. And when I asked her what she knew about Elias Crane and why a man would do what he was doing, she was quiet a long time, turning her cup, and then she said, "You'd have to ask him. It's not my story to tell. But I'll tell you this much, Toby Hale, since you're the first young fool to come asking instead of laughing." She set the cup down. Her hand wasn't quite steady. "Some of us in this town are alive because of that man, and we have spent 30 years pretending we don't know it, because the not knowing is more comfortable than what we'd owe him if we did." I asked her what she meant. She wouldn't say more. She showed me the door, kind but firm, and at the threshold she stopped me with a hand on my arm and said one last thing, low, like a secret she was finally too tired to keep all the way down. "When you go back out there, and you will look at where he planted them, not the trees, where, in a ring, ask yourself what a man rings off and keeps watch over in the middle of nowhere. Ask yourself what's worth that much water." I rode home in the dark for the second time that week with more questions than I'd had any right to start. And out past the dry wash, in a ring of dying trees, an old man sat down in the dirt beside the seep hole that had failed him, and waited for a rain that the whole sky said was never going to come. I didn't know it yet, but the town was about 3 weeks from finding out everything. And we were going to find it out the worst possible way, too late to thank him, and just in time to be ashamed. The rain didn't come, but the fever did. I should explain something about a place like Cottonwood Bend, so you understand what fever meant to us. We had no doctor. We'd had one, a young man named Prout, but he'd left 2 summers back when his wife couldn't take the dust anymore. And after that what we had was Halloran's shelf of patent tonics and Mrs. Ansell, who knew herbs and prayer, which we used the way you use a bucket on a house fire, frantically, and with no real faith it'll matter. So when the Becker children came down sick, first the little girl, then the 2 boys fast, the way it goes through children, there was a particular kind of quiet that fell over the town. The grown folks went still and started counting their own. I saw it on every porch. The arithmetic of a parent in a place with no doctor. How many do I have? How close do they live? Who did mine play with? It was Mrs. Ansell who said the word out loud because she'd seen it before. Diphtheria, the strangling sickness, the one that goes for the throats of children and leaves the grown alone, mostly, which is somehow the cruelest arrangement the Lord ever drew up. And here is where I have to tell you the thing that the rest of this story turns on. The thing I didn't understand until I was kneeling in the dirt of that ring with my hat in my hands. When the fever came, the town did what towns do. We barricaded. Families pulled in tight, shut their doors, stopped trading, stopped gathering. The Beckers, the sick family, got left. Oh, we didn't say it that way. We said quarantine. We left food at the end of their lane and backed away from it. We meant well, and we were terrified, and those 2 things lived in the same chest at the same time, the way they always do. Nobody would go in. Nobody would touch them. Nobody but one man. I didn't see it start. I heard it after in pieces. But I know that within 2 days of the Becker girl taking sick, a wagon track appeared in the dust leading from the Becker place out toward the dry wash and back. And I know that Elias Crane, the cracked old man who poured water on dead sticks, the one we laughed at, was the only soul in Cottonwood Bend who walked through the Becker's door. I went out to him. God knows what made me. I was scared like everybody, but I think by then the splinter of him had worked too deep to leave alone. I found him at the seep hole, which had given up a little water again after a single cruel, teasing thunderstorm passed over and wet nothing, and he was filling his buckets, and his face, I'd never seen it like that. Gray, old in a way that wasn't years. "You been to the Beckers?" I said. "Somebody's got to. He didn't stop filling the buckets. Children can't nurse themselves." "You'll catch it." "Maybe." He set a full bucket down, looked at me, and there was something in that look that I've never gotten out from under, some weight he handed me without asking if I wanted to carry it. "You scared, Hale?" "Yes," I said. It was the most honest thing I'd said since I came to the Bend. "Good, means you got sense." He picked the bucket back up. "Now go home and use it or come help me carry, one or the other. I haven't got the daylight for the middle. I want to tell you I picked up a bucket. I want to tell you that so badly that I've half convinced myself across the years that I did, and then the truth comes back like a tooth you can't stop touching. I didn't. I was 22, and I was afraid to die, and I rode home, and I shut my door like everybody else." And Elias Crane nursed 3 children through the strangling sickness, alone, an old man with no medicine but cool water and patience, and whatever herbs Mrs. Ansell could leave at the wash for him to fetch. Because, I learned later, she was the one supplying him, the two of them running a quiet relief line that the rest of us never saw, her too afraid of the sick to go herself and him too stubborn to let children die untended. The Becker boys lived. Both of them. They live still, grown men with children of their own, and not one of them knows the whole of it because the man who saved them never told a living soul. The little girl did not live. He buried her himself. The parents were too sick by then to lift a spade. Diphtheria had finally crossed the line into the groan, the way it sometimes does, and the Becker parents lay fevered in the same room their daughter had died in. So Elias Crane wrapped the child and carried her out, and the wagon track in the dust ran from the Becker place to the dry wash one more time. I know where he took her, I know now. But I'm getting ahead, and I promise to take it slow, so let me back up to the part I can bear to tell in order. The fever burned itself out by the first cold week. It took the Becker girl, and before it was through, 2 others, old Tam the blacksmith, whose heart had stopped, and a baby out on the Ferris place who I never even saw. 3 dead. In a town our size, that's a wound that doesn't close. And when it was over and the doors opened and we crept back out blinking into our lives, there was a new and ugly thing in the air between us, and I didn't have a name for it then either. Now I'd call it the shame of the spared. We didn't talk about who'd gone in and who hadn't. We didn't talk about Elias Crane at all if we could help it. Because to talk about him was to remember that an old man we'd called a fool had walked through the door we'd all run from, and had nursed our children, and had buried our dead with his own hands, and had asked nothing, and had gone back out to his ring of trees and picked up his buckets like none of it had happened. A town can forgive a man almost anything. What it can't easily forgive is being put to shame by him, and Elias Crane shamed Cottonwood Bend so completely, so quietly, that the only way we could go on living with ourselves was to keep right on pretending he was crazy. Cracked old Crane and his trees. We needed him cracked. A cracked man's goodness doesn't count. A cracked man can't make you feel the size of your own failing. So we kept him cracked in our talk, in our laughing, and it worked. It worked for years, the way a lie works right up until the ground gives it up. I couldn't keep it up. That's the only thing I'll say for myself. I started riding out again, more than before. And one evening, near a year after the fever, I finally asked him the thing straight. "Why'd you do it?" I said. "The Beckers, you knew you might die. Nobody'd have blamed you for staying out. He was banking dirt around a sapling that had, against everything, put out new leaves that spring, small and pale and almost obscenely alive, there in that dead-colored country. He worked at it a while before he answered, and when he did his voice had a thing in it I'd never heard from him, a crack down the middle of all that flat stillness. "I had a family once," he said, "before this, before the bend." He didn't look up from the dirt. "I was a wagon master, brought folks west like Halloran says, only he says it like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing." He sat back on his heels. "I brought a train through in 51, 40 wagons. There was a sickness on the trail, not this one, a different one, but the same in the ways that matter. It came up fast, and there wasn't any doctor, and there wasn't anywhere to run to. Just open country, and the thing eating through us a wagon at a time." He picked up a clod of dirt and crumbled it slow between his fingers, watching it fall. "I made a decision," he said. "I was the wagon master. Decisions were mine to make. There were sick wagons and well wagons, and the well ones were scared, and they came to me and they said, 'We have to leave the sick behind or we'll all die.' And the country was hard and winter was coming up the passes, and the math of it," his voice caught on the word math, and I thought of my own arithmetic, my tally book, the way I'd calculated the impossibility of his trees. The math said they were right, so I let them go. The well wagons, I let them pull out ahead, and I told myself I'd stay back with the sick ones and bring them along slow." He was quiet a long time. "My wife was in a sick wagon by then," he said, "and our 2 girls." I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. The light was going down red the way it does, and the new little leaves on the sapling were trembling in a wind I couldn't feel. "I stayed," he said. "I want that to be true so bad I almost said it like it was the whole truth. I stayed, but I'd already let the others go. I'd already made the choice that some lives weighed more than others, and once a man's made that choice, hail, he's made it. It doesn't matter that I stayed with mine. I'd weighed children on a scale, and the ones I let go ahead, they made it. And the ones I stayed back with," he shook his head, slow, "I buried my wife and both my girls on the trail. No marker but rocks. No tree, no shade, nothing growing, nothing to say here was a person, here was a child, here was a thing the world should be sorry to lose. Just rocks, in a country that forgets a grave inside a season." He stood up. His knees cracked. He looked at his ring of trees in the failing light, and I finally understood that I was not looking at the work of a crazy man. "I couldn't go back and plant them anything," he said. "The trail's 1,000 miles behind me, and I couldn't find the rocks now if I rode all year. So..." He spread his dirt-black hands at the ring of saplings, 40 of them, some living, some dead, all of them watered with the last strength of an old man's arms. "So I plant them here." I thought I understood. I thought he meant the trees were for his wife and his girls, memorials, the markers he couldn't give them on the trail. I was close, but I was wrong about the most important part, and I wouldn't learn the whole of it until the wind laid one of those trees flat, and the town came out to look, and what we found under the roots stopped every tongue in Cottonwood Bend. Because the trees weren't only markers. He'd planted them over something. The wind came in March, the kind we call a blue norther, a wall of cold and dust that you see coming as a brown bruise on the horizon an hour before it hits. It tore shingles off the mercantile and laid the church's steeple over sideways and killed 2 head of Dahlon's cattle that got pinned against a fence and couldn't turn their backs to it. And out past the dry wash, it took one of Elia's Crane's trees. I rode out the next morning because I rode out most mornings by then. The old man and I had come to an arrangement of silence and occasional words that was as close to friendship as either of us had. I came over the rise and I saw him on his knees at the edge of the ring, and at first I thought the wind had finally done what the drought never could and killed him, and my heart went up into my throat. But he was alive. He was kneeling beside a fallen sapling, one of the cottonwoods, a good-sized one now, 6 or 7 feet, that the norther had ripped clean out by the roots and laid flat. And he wasn't trying to right it. He was just kneeling there in the cold gray light with his hat off, his thin white hair lifting in the wind, looking down into the hole where the roots had torn free. I got off my horse, I walked up slow. "Mr. Crane," I said, "I'll help you set it back." "No," he said, "quiet, leave it, it's done its time." And then I looked down into the hole. I want to tell this part right because I've heard it told wrong since, told for shivers, told the way you tell a ghost story. It wasn't a ghost story. It was the gentlest, saddest true thing I ever stood over. In the dirt where the roots had been, wrapped in the fine pale lace of the rootlets that had grown down and around and through and held, was a small bundle. Cloth gone to almost nothing, the color of the dirt itself. And the shape of it, the size of it, I knew before my mind would let me say it. A child. The roots of that cottonwood had grown down around the body of a child and cradled it, the way roots will, the way the old man must have known they would when he set the sapling in over the grave 30 years before. I looked at the ring, 40 trees, some living, some long dead and replaced, a ring around his house, and I understood all at once the whole shape of it, and I had to put my hand on my horse to stay standing. "How many?" I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. Elias Crane put his hat back on. He looked out at the ring with an expression I have never been able to describe to anybody who wasn't there. Not grief, exactly, because grief had long since worn smooth in him, but something downstream of grief, something that comes after, a kind of terrible tenderness. "The trail's behind me," he said again, like he had a year before, only now I heard it. "I couldn't plant anything for mine, but there's children out here too, Hale, always has been. A baby the Faireyes lost, the Becker girl, 2 little ones the Mexican family had before they moved on that nobody in this town would dig a grave for because of where they came from, the blacksmith's stillborn son that the church wouldn't put in consecrated ground." He paused. "Old Tam came to me about that one. 20 years ago. Came to the crazy man out by the wash because there wasn't anybody else and asked me to bury his boy. So I did, and I planted a tree over him so the country couldn't forget where he lay." He looked at me. "I buried the ones nobody else would," he said, "and I planted a tree over each so they'd have what mine never got, shade, something growing, something that says here was a child the world should be sorry to lose. That's the ring, Hale. That's what I've been carrying water to all these years. Not trees, them. I've been keeping them company. A man oughtn't lie alone out here with nothing growing over him." The town came out because that's what towns do. Word ran like fire, and by noon there were 30 people standing at the edge of the ring, hats in hands, and not one of them said a thing. I have stood in a lot of silences in my life. The silence in a church when the preacher's gone too far. The silence after a man says something true at a card table. But I never stood in a silence like the one in that ring, with 30 people of Cottonwood Bend looking at 40 trees and finally understanding what they'd been laughing at for 30 years. Mrs. Ansell was there. She came up beside me and she was crying without any sound, the tears just running, and she said, so quiet only I heard it, "I knew about Tam's boy. I knew about that one. I never knew about the rest. My God, all of them. He kept all of them." The Becker boys were there, grown men now, and somebody must have told them, because one of them walked to the tree that I would later learn stood over their sister, and he put his hand flat on the bark, and his shoulders went, and his brother came and stood with him, and the 2 of them just held onto that tree like it was the little girl they'd been too young to remember losing. And Elias Crane stood in the middle of it all, in the middle of his ring, and he looked uncomfortable. That's the part I can't ever shake. He looked embarrassed, like he'd been caught at something private, like a man caught praying. He didn't want the silence. He didn't want the 30 hats in hands. He'd never done it to be seen. He'd done it because somebody had to, the way he went into the Beckers, because somebody had to, the way he'd stayed back on the trail, because no, not the same as that. The trail was the wound. The ring was the thing he'd built on top of the wound, so he could stand to keep living over it. We helped him bury the child the Cottonwood had given up, the Ferris baby. It turned out, by the little tin cross Mrs. Ferris recognized and fell to her knees over. We set the tree back in. It lived another year before it died for good, and by then the old man was past caring for it, was past caring for any of them, because the winter after the norther took him too. He didn't go hard. He went the way he'd lived, quiet, out at his place. I found him. He was in his chair by the cold stove, and he'd been gone a day or two, and on the table beside him was a tally book. A little leather one, edges curled soft, not unlike my own, and I have never been able to decide whether that's a coincidence or whether the old man had been keeping his own arithmetic all along, the way I kept mine. In it, in a cramped hand, were 40 entries. Not all of them had names. Ferris infant, Becker Sarah, Tam's son. The Garcia children too, names unknown to me, may God know them. And then ones with no names at all, just dates going back 30 years, children he'd buried that the town never even knew it had lost, drifters' bobbies, a body found by the wash, a small grave he'd come across and tended because tending was the only prayer he had left. And at the front, the very first entry, in ink gone brown with age. Margaret Ann, beloved wife and daughters, buried on the trail 1851, no tree, forgive me. That was the only place in the whole book he'd written anything about himself. Forgive me. 2 words for the choice he'd made on the trail, the choice to weigh some lives heavier than others. A choice he'd spent the rest of his life trying to unmake, 1 child, 1 bucket, 1 tree at a time, planting shade over every small body the world wanted to forget. Because once, in country that forgets a grave inside a season, he'd had to leave his own with nothing growing over them at all. We buried him in the ring. Of course we did. There was a gap where the cottonwood had fallen, and we put him there, in the center of the children he'd kept, and Mrs. Ansell planted a sapling over him with her own hands. The town doesn't laugh about the trees anymore. The town tends them now, takes turns hauling water in the dry months, the way we should have for 30 years and didn't. The Becker boys' children climb them. There's shade out past the dry wash now, real shade, dappled green moving on the ground, and children play in it who don't know and shouldn't have to know what their playground is, only that it's cool and green, and the old folks go quiet and gentle when they walk through it. I'm an old man myself now. Older than Crane was, that first day I sat my horse and watched him pour water a finger's width at a time. I still keep my tally book. I still chew the pencil. And every evening when the light goes down red and swollen over the flat, I ride out past the wash and I sit on his rock. It's still there, his rock, and I look at the ring. And I think about the thing he told me before I understood it, that's worn so smooth now I could pass it off as my own. A man plants a tree he won't sit in the shade of. That's the only kind worth planting. I didn't pick up the bucket when he asked me to. I have carried that 30 years, and I'll carry it into whatever's next. But I carry water to his ring now, every dry month, and I've trained 2 of the Becker grandchildren to do it after me, and they'll train others, and the shade will go on out here long after the last of us who knew him is under it. He was not a crazy man. He was a man keeping a promise so large that from a distance it looked like madness. You can't always tell the two apart. I told you that at the start. I just didn't know yet that I'd spend the rest of my life learning it from the inside, out past a dry wash, in the green and moving shade of 40 trees that a lone old man carried water to, 1 finger's width at a time, so that no child out here would ever again have to lie in the ground with nothing.